From U.S. Naval Academy to the 3rd Marine Division, John Bishop.
Well, good morning, man. Good morning. It's a privilege to be here. I want to thank Paul for the opportunity to come and share a few thoughts with you. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I came to faith in Jesus as an 18-year-old sailor on active duty through the ministry of the Navy chaplains. Back in those days, chapel was mandatory, so every Sunday they formed us up, marched us over this big chapel, big auditorium, and I was hearing the gospel because the chaplains who were leading that were all evangelicals. And just one Sunday it made sense, and it clicked, like for a lot of you, and so I went forward, and my journey with Jesus began in the military. And the next 12 years, only 12 years that followed, was intense years of learning about war at the Naval Academy, training for war in the Marine Corps, and going to war in Vietnam. So my whole orientation as a believer, those 12 years, was all in the context of warfare. And all your experiences in life, those early experiences physically or spiritually, shape you. So I've been shaped significantly by my education and experiences in the context of warfare. I set that aside for a number of years when I got out of the Marine Corps and went to work for the folks that support the Congress in a thing called the National Prayer Breakfast. And for those of you that can remember the early 70s, the anti-war movement, it was pretty intense. And being a Vietnam veteran, candidly, men, was not a positive thing. Guys come back. It didn't happen to me, but a lot of guys came back. They got spit on. They got trashed. I mean, there was a lot of animosity towards veterans, particularly Vietnam veterans. And time in D.C. was one of the central locations, with the Pentagon being there and the demonstrations and stuff. So I did everything I could to demilitarize myself so I could fit in with the prayer breakfast community, which is working on reconciliation and loving people and trying to restore things. And then there was a little humor somewhere in here. I was still a bachelor, and I wanted to date some young ladies, and being a Vietnam veteran was a showstopper. So that was just part of what was happening at that time. And what I'd like to do is just share a couple of things that I've kind of learned that's come out of that process. One of those things that I've learned is that we're all wounded. Every one of us. We're wounded from the fall, for sure. We're wounded from the sins of others. Where's Nick? I was talking to Nick earlier, the kids he's working with and the things that he experiences with the trauma of kids, the sins of others. And then we're broken from our own sin and folly. So we are needy men that need healing from the wounds of others, of the fall of our sin. And so what I'd like to do, that woundedness also gives us a broken story. All of our stories to some degree are broken. So what I want to do is, I'm sure some of you know what this is. This is a Purple Heart Medal. This is the medal we award to those who are wounded in action, WIA, and to the next of kin of those killed in action, KIA. And I want to pass this around, and I want you to ask you to grip it for just a second and ask the Lord to show you one of those moments in your life where there was this wounding or brokenness from your own folly, from maybe somebody hurting you. But grip this and process that moment, because that moment, I want to come back to it a little later in the presentation. But while it's going around, I want to emphasize that Jesus earned two of these while he was here. He was wounded for our transgressions, and he was killed in action at the cross. And he wants to do for us what was done for him. He wants to transform those wounds into scars. Most men are living from their wounds. And the challenge in this healing process is to have those wounds transformed into scars. The scars never deny the wound, but the scars testify to the healing. So as I pass this around, process that moment for yourself in your own story, okay? The goal that I have in these few minutes that we have together is I want to help give you a process that puts you on the path of healing and a process that fixes your broken story. But I've got to set all of this in the context of spiritual warfare. Men, this issue of warfare is probably the most misunderstood, misaligned, ignored, refused reality in which we live. It simply cannot be overstated. And there's several passages of Scripture, several things that teach us this. The first one that I point to is when God planted the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden. Let me stop saying. When would you say, if you ask the question, when did evil come into creation? What would be a typical answer? When Lucifer rebelled, this happened before Adam and Eve. A lot of folks think that evil came into the creation when Adam and Eve sinned and rebelled. That's not true. The tree tells us that evil existed prior to our creation. And we all know Satan was cast out of heaven as a result of this conflict. I've never heard, and he was cast to earth. I've never heard anybody ask the question, where was he cast to? Maui? French Riviera? Jackson Hole, Wyoming? Savannah? No, he was cast to a place that was dark, formless, and void, which is Genesis 1:2. And I believe that when God created the garden, he was, in the military terminology, he was establishing a forward operating base from which he was going to launch his story of redemption. So this context, we're born and born again into a world at war. Another area of validating this idea is, do you realize every time you pray the Lord's Prayer, you're declaring war? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, is a declaration of war against the kingdom that's here. We're declaring war every time we pray. But there's another aspect of this. You know what's on a person's heart typically when you listen to them pray at the time of vulnerability. In the Lord's Prayer, further down, Jesus prays, teaches us to pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one, which is the correct translation of Matthew 6:13. And then over in John 17, his other most well-known prayer, he prays, Lord, I do not pray you take them out of the world. I pray you protect them from the evil one. This issue is on the heart of Jesus, this cosmic conflict, the battle, the process of the evil one. In fact, John tells us that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil in 1 John 3:8. What's on the heart of Jesus, I believe, should be on our hearts. As his followers, we should be his allies in carrying out his agenda to destroy the works of the devil. In the military, every fighter pilot's got a wingman, every ranger's got a ranger buddy, every SEAL's got a swim buddy, every soldier's got a foxhole buddy, every Marine has a fire team. We do not send men into battle by themselves. It's just not done. And this is why men, I think Jesus sent his men out 2 by 2. They had a wingman. they had a ranger buddy, because he knew what he was sending his men into. And in fact, when you read when he sent them out, one of the first things they often did was cast out demons. They went directly into this conflict when he sent them out 2 by 2. So this is on his heart, seriously on his heart. And therefore, I believe as his followers, it should be on our hearts as well. So the context is warfare. We're born and born again into a world at war. And so the question is, how do we engage? How do we really get involved in this warfare? Well, over in Ephesians 6, it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. And then over in 2 Corinthians 10, he says, the weapons of our warfare are not flesh and blood. So we have weapons that are specifically designed to engage in this cosmic conflict. So I want to give you a definition of weapon so that you can get a feel for what Paul is talking about. A weapon is anything that you can use that destroys your enemy's ability to wage war against you and others. That's a weapon. Anything that you can use that destroys your enemy's ability to wage war against you and others. So when you take this definition into spiritual warfare, I always start with the same two. The first one is forgiveness. And I venture to say that most of you have never heard forgiveness characterized as a weapon. But man, that's exactly what it is. When we forgive, we're destroying Satan's ability to wage war against us and others through anger, bitterness, revenge, alienation, hostility, tit for tat, settle the score, get even. Forgiveness is one of the most powerful weapons that we have. And by the way, there's another side to this. Jesus is very clear that unforgiveness is really dangerous, because he says, we pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. 2 verses later he says, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive. And then in Matthew 18:35, the steward was forgiven much, and then went to get, he had another steward pinged on him to get the little, and the master was angry. And the closing verse of Matthew 18:35 says, if you do not forgive your brother from your heart, neither will my Father forgive you. And so I want to just ask a question, because this came up yesterday. How many of you have known older people, maybe in the retirement homes and stuff like that, that are bitter? You've seen them? How bitterness corrupts and destroys because of unforgiveness. So the first step towards healing from the wounds that we've been given is to forgive. That's where Jesus starts with us, and that's where we need to start with others. And forgiveness runs 2 ways. It's not only giving forgiveness, but it's asking for forgiveness. Because there are things for which we need to be forgiven in relationships. I need to be forgiven from my former wife over our divorce. We need to ask for forgiveness. We need to have the humility to ask to be forgiven. But there are also those whom we need to forgive. So this is a powerful weapon. The second one is generosity. When we're generous, we destroy Satan's ability to wage war against us through the love of money and the deceitfulness of riches. In both of these, we are taking the fight to the enemy when we forgive, and when we give, and when we forgive. And men, these are 2 of the 4 cornerstones of God's love. God's love gives, and God's love forgives. So if love is an issue, if that's a message, that message must include giving and forgiving. It just can't get there any other way. These 2 weapons are where healing begins. So I want to set the stage for that. Now the next question is, how do you fix your broken story? Men, you fix a broken story by embedding that story, your story, into a greater story. So that's how we begin the process of fixing your broken story, is to embed it in the greatest story that's ever been told. Well, how do you do that? You do that with, let me say it this way. In Vietnam, I carried a M16 and a 45, and my Marines carried hand grenades. So those are individual weapons. So forgiveness and generosity tend to be individual weapons. But we also had a thing called crew-served weapons, C-R-E-W, tanks, machine gun, artillery, mortars, helicopters. It took a team to operate them. And that's where this idea of a little group of men, a little fellowship, a little band of brothers, a little energy group, the things that Paul was talking about earlier, that becomes a spiritual weapon. Because what you're now destroying is you're destroying Satan's ability to isolate you, to set you apart. And I think all of us at one time or another can testify to the, say, dumb decisions that we've made or wrong decisions we've made because we were isolated. We didn't have someone calibrating that. We didn't have that iron sharpening iron component that helped us keep from making those bad decisions. So a little group, a little band of brothers becomes a spiritual weapon. Now, I don't believe this particular weapon, again, can be overemphasized. We're living right now in an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Some of you may be a part of that. And the way to cure that, the way to heal that, the way to get in the battle is to form these little groups and reach out and invite one or two other guys to join you. And I want to stress that these groups, golf. Get together with guys and play golf. There's something about getting together on a golf course. Get together and play bridge. I'm trying to get some guys together to play cribbage. If y'all, some of you may not even know what that game is. But gather around what's natural. Sometimes a Bible study or an accountability group or a men's fellowship can be a little artificial. So do the things with men, relate to them that are natural. Let me ask you maybe a tough question. How many of you can give me the name and phone number of the person who lives on your right, your left, and across the street? A few. And what did Jesus say the great commandment was? Love him and love your neighbor. So reach out to your neighbor. But don't go to your neighbor with the 4 spiritual laws in your pocket or an agenda to get them to come to church or any of that stuff. Go over and hear their story. Learn about their story. Every man has a story. Every man's story is worth the telling, and every man's story is worth the hearing. The gospel is a war story. Yes, it's a love story, but it's a love story set in the middle of conflict. So go and hear the stories of other men and learn from them what's been going on in their life and through their life. It's our stories that engage us with people at levels that nothing else does. And then together, in this little group, steward our stories into the greatest story that's ever been told. That's, in my opinion, that's evangelism. That's the way to reach people, is to engage with their story. Because we've all got one, it's all broken, and we want to fix it by embedding it into a greater story, but you can't do that by yourself. You've got to have other brothers in your life to do that. I think every man in this room wants to be a part of something greater than themselves. I think that's wired into us. When God put eternity into our hearts, one of those things was a desire to be a part of something greater. And this is how we participate in that something greater, is taking our stories into that greater story. I'd like to put a little spin on this. When I was younger, I had a mentor by the name of Walt Hendrickson, and I was asking Walt one day, as a discipler, when he began to disciple men, thinking of myself at that point, what did he want to see? What was his idea of what it meant to be a disciple? And he said, John, it was two things. I want to see men with perspective. And he defined perspective as the ability to see the end from the beginning, to be able to look ahead, see, and then the second thing he wanted them to have was conviction, the willingness to live by what that perspective showed him. So I've taken that, and I've been thinking a lot about it in terms of what happens when we have to stand before Jesus. What is that conversation going to be like? What's the discussion that we're going to have with him about how we've stewarded the life that he gave us? And at the end of the conversation, at the end of that, he's either going to say, come, enter the kingdom prepared for you since the beginning of the world. And the doors of heaven are going to open, and you're going to hear the music and the welcome and the applause and the joy of coming into the kingdom. For others, they're going to hear, depart from me. I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. And they're going to hear the doors open and the screams and the horror and the smell of hell. Is what they're going to experience. So at the end of the day, guys, it all boils down to what you hear. That's how I define success. It's what you hear. Do you hear come, or do you hear depart? If you hear come, then all the pain, all the disappointments, all the hurts, all the failures, all the disappointments will dissipate as they are absorbed in the incredible joy that will be yours coming into the presence of the King. On the other hand, if you hear depart, all the money, all the success, all the titles, all the achievements, they're going to dissipate. They're going to be irrelevant. So success is what you hear. And that's a challenge of perspective, is to be thinking about this time, and Jesus encourages us to do this, to ponder and to reflect on what those conversations are going to be like when we get there. So forgiveness and generosity are going to be part of the discussion. But I also think a big part of the discussion is going to be, how did you ally with me in my agenda to destroy the works of the devil? How did you participate with me in this cosmic battle? So there's just a couple of thoughts. We get healing by getting into battle. You know, for Jesus, everything in Jesus is the opposite, right? You lead by serving, the first by being last. You know, he's humble, exalted by being humble. Well, healing's the same way. In the military, you had the $1 million wound. That was a wound bad enough to get you out of the battle and sent home, but not bad enough to disfigure or disable you. But it got you out of the battle. But in Jesus, the healing comes from getting into battle. And you get into battle with our weapons, forgiveness and generosity, band of brothers. So these are the things that matter. And so what I want to challenge you, when you leave here, when you think about the summer, and you ponder these things, I want you to walk humbly. I want you to walk boldly, because we follow the King. But I want you to walk together. Find a couple other guys and walk together. Semper Fidelis. Well,